Hey guys, for someone who's been a Godzilla fan for around 40 years, one of my favorite things about Godzilla King of the Monsters was the amount of callbacks to the films of all the various Toho Godzilla eras. Anyone who's ever seen a Godzilla movie is familiar with the atomic breath, but there are many fans out there that are new to the franchise who didn't know until the final fight scene with King Ghidorah in King of the Monsters that he could reroute that energy into a nuclear pulse, sending a blast out in all directions, giving the Big G an aggro attack as well as a highly effective defensive measure. Today I want to take a look at what the ability is, and from there I'll rank the use of each one from least to most powerful nuclear pulse attacks. The nuclear pulse was something that wasn't officially introduced to the Godzilla franchise until the Heisei era by Koichi Kawakita, the special effects director on all of the films after the return of Godzilla. During the Heisei era, many of the directors here wanted to take the fighting style of Godzilla in a new direction in contrast to the Showa era. It was thought that the more hands-on wrestling style of combat was too unrealistic and perhaps even a bit childish, leading to the heavy use of ranged attacks throughout the 90s. For Godzilla, the standard atomic breath wouldn't be enough, so we saw the spiral atomic beam upgrade, along with the nuclear pulse, added to his arsenal. The pulse attack, or defensive measure, is a basic rerouting of sorts, where the force and energy of the atomic breath is sent out from the torso in all directions. Usually you can even see Godzilla charge up this attack in the same way that he does with his powerful atomic breath, with the spines lighting up, and a spark that can sometimes be seen in the back of his mouth. The force of the blast has varied greatly, however, so let's rank them out and see what each one was like and what kind of damage each produced. There are really only 6 times where the nuclear pulse ability was used. Godzilla has used other similar abilities that may be related to the nuclear pulse, but we'll get to those later. So let's start off with my ranking at number 6 with Godzilla vs. Biollante. Here we see Godzilla as he's starting to get overwhelmed by the much larger Biollante. Her smaller vines have already pierced his arm and his hand, while the larger ones reach out to strangle out the Big G. Up to this point, Godzilla had been blasting her vines with his atomic breath, but now with them wrapped around him, he would have to resort to the nuclear pulse for help. In the first use, you can see it build up like a standard breath attack, yet then the Big G starts to pulse with electricity, which then explodes out with a force wave doing similar damage to the atomic breath, freeing him of Biollante's grip. For an even stronger use of the nuclear pulse, we would only have to look to Godzilla vs. Mothra, also of the Heisei era. After fighting Godzilla with everything she could dish out, Mothra began unloading her scales onto the Big G. This was a last-ditch attack of hers in the Showa era, but here, the cloud of glowing dust-like scales could be used in order to reflect energy back onto her enemy, doing so with her lightning attacks. Because the atomic breath would just be reflected back at him, Godzilla chose to intelligently pull out the nuclear pulse here in order to break the effect and send Mothra flying to the ground. Not to be outdone, Godzilla would pull this ability out again against King Ghidorah for their Heisei era matchup. This time Godzilla's ultimate nemesis would face off against him without the Big G having any aid from Mothra or Rodan. This would prove almost fatal for Godzilla, while also setting up a shot for the movie posters and many other awesome artwork and statues, where Ghidorah would choke out the Big G using its necks, strangling him almost to death before he could get off a nuclear pulse blast that would outdo the one used on Mothra, sending the 150-meter Ghidorah flying, setting up an atomic breath attack that would decapitate the dragon kaiju's center head. The ability would pop back up again at the end of the Heisei era with Godzilla vs. Destoroyah. Here, as most of us already know, after absorbing enormous amounts of radiation, Godzilla would enter the burning stage, pushing its energy and temperature off the scale, causing the Big G to give off random nuclear pulses that he most likely wasn't even controlling. Along with the standard red pulses of energy, once heating enough, Godzilla would leak off a type of nuclear pulse wave behind it, while still sending out standard looking blasts. During his fight with the Destroyer, the pulses would get so intense that they actually started to blow up buildings and even had an explosive impact effect on the Destroyer itself, shaping up to be the most powerful pulse of the era. Fortunately for us fans though, the ability didn't end with the Heisei era, and we would see it return in Godzilla 2000. During the fight between Godzilla and Orga, Orga would take a bad gamble and try to ingest Godzilla before fully taking him out. After getting the Big G partially into its mouth, Godzilla's spines would slowly light up, Yet this time there was an extra glow beyond the normal lighting we see with the breath attack. This was the charge up for a large pulse that would tear Orga apart from the inside out. I actually mentioned this attack in my atomic breath video, as many people, including myself, weren't sure if this was a blast or a pulse, but it appears to be a pulse after several rewatches and more research. So it belongs here at number 2, the pulse that fried Orga. And now for number 1, and easily the most powerful nuclear pulse usage ever done in the entire Godzilla franchise, done by legendary Godzilla. Many of you were wondering why the MonsterVerse Godzilla didn't make my top 5 atomic breath attacks video, stating that he achieved the fire or burning form. Well, unfortunately, he never used the breath attack while charged up, but he did use the nuclear pulse, and it was so powerful, it's strongly held in place here at number 1. I have to wonder just what that spiral beam could have been like, but let's get back on track here, where we actually have to start at the prequel to King of the Monsters with the graphic novel Godzilla Aftershock. Here Godzilla is facing off with the Muto Prime in their final battle. At the climax, the Big G is able to lift the Muto onto his back, where he fires off a variant of the nuclear pulse, sending energy through its spines or back, launching the Titan into the air. And don't forget, this is before Mothra or the thermonuclear power-up. And for another quick note, notice that Godzilla has red highlights in this image, similar to the fire/burning look. It's interesting to note, but just remember that the last prequel novel didn't line up perfectly with the film, so take what you want of this. Yet as powerful as that blast would need to be to send the Prime Muto flying like that, there is still another use of the pulse that makes all of the others look like child's play. Godzilla would end up using a trick of the Heisei era and get several power-ups in order to defeat King Ghidorah. First off, after the Oxygen Destroyer attack, Monarch would revive a nearly dead Godzilla with a nuclear warhead, charging up the Titan and healing his injuries. In the next fight, however, Ghidorah would drop Godzilla from near orbit, almost killing him again, where he's luckily revived and powered up a second time by Mothra. Now coursing with more energy than ever before, the Big G would release a devastating group of pulse attacks. According to a tweet from director Michael Dougherty, it's the Mothra power-up that is responsible for the nuclear pulse variant and not the fire ability, and this is evident in the Mothra wings that are present in the flames of the attack. The power here was off the scale. The first blast was able to burn right through Ghidorah's wings, while the second one burned out both of the side heads, with a third and final blast given off for good measure released on top of the dying Titan. Godzilla would then finish off that third head with an atomic blast, giving us easily the best damage output of all of the nuclear pulse attacks. As kind of an honorable mention, I want to bring back up those abilities used by Godzilla that are likely related to the nuclear pulse. The first one goes back to the Showa era with Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, where guess who, Koichi Kawakita, was the assistant special effects director. At the final battle with Mecha G, the evil mech is trying to escape when Godzilla somehow turns himself into an electromagnet, allowing him to pull in Mecha G to finish him off. We don't get an explanation on the attack, yet he did get hit by several bolts of lightning earlier in the film. During the usage of the ability, his body would pulse with blue energy and sparks in a similar fashion to the blue blast that is usually associated with the pulse, possibly linking the two abilities. Sticking with Mecha G, yet from the following era, we have Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2, where perhaps another variant of the pulse is used. Here, the man-made Mecha G has Godzilla on the ropes, down on the ground loaded with shock cables that are electrocuting the Big G. In mortal danger, Godzilla would light up with a blue lightning charge, followed by a Heisei nuclear pulse buildup along with the trademark blue sparking effect in its mouth. The lightning effect then changed to red, where it started to feed back into Mecha G, likely saving Godzilla's life. A similar feedback would happen to Kaiser Ghidorah in Final Wars after the Ozaki Kaiser power-up, allowing Godzilla to break free of Ghidorah's grasp. It's even possible that Shin Godzilla's beams out the back attack is a variation on the pulse, along with Godzilla Earth's electromagnetic heating ability. And that's it for me on the nuclear pulse attack, guys. I hope you learned something new here, and I'd love to know if you agree with my ranking on the pulse attacks. If you didn't, I'd love to see your list down in the comments. And don't forget, your likes, subscriptions, and comments are much appreciated and go a long way towards helping the channel grow. Thanks again, and I hope to see you next time.